My name is Claire. And on April 18th, I learned exactly how dangerous it can be when a spoiled heir thinks the world owes him obedience. It started like any other Thursday morning. I was in my office by 7 a.m., coffee in one hand, organizing the quarterly reports for our biggest client. The same client who had practically saved the company from bankruptcy last year. That's when the door slammed open. Nathaniel Carter, 19 years old, son of our CEO, heir to a company he had never worked a single honest day for. He marched in, designer suit hanging awkwardly on his lanky frame, eyes blazing with the kind of fury only a spoiled child can muster when someone dares tell them no. "You think you can ignore me?" he barked, slamming his fist on my desk. "When I give an order, you follow it." I stayed seated, calm, professional. "Nathaniel, I don't take orders from interns." His face turned red. "I'm the future CEO. You'll regret this." I raised an eyebrow. "Then I'll deal with you when you're actually the CEO. Until then." I gestured politely toward the door. "Please leave my office." I knew brushing him off like that would come back to bite me. I just didn't expect it to be that same night. Let me take you back a few months before that morning. When our CEO, Richard Carter, announced his son would be joining the company for experience, most of us assumed Nathaniel would spend a few weeks shadowing departments before getting bored and vanishing back to whatever luxury resort he'd crawled out of. We were wrong. Nathaniel was handed the title of Junior Operations Director, a title I'd earned after 5 years of blood, sweat, and late nights, with no actual qualifications and no understanding of how our company worked. And somehow, in his mind, that meant I was supposed to take orders from him. At first, I played along. I corrected his mistakes quietly. I fixed his disastrous proposals before they reached clients. I even covered for him when he missed deadlines. Why? Because I valued my career. Because I believed in this company. And maybe because I thought he'd grow up. I was wrong about that too. The breaking point came 2 weeks before that Thursday morning. Nathaniel barged into my office, tossed a file on my desk, and said, "Fire the Johnson team. They annoyed me." The Johnson team, my team, had just secured a $3.5 million contract for the company. "I'm not firing anyone because they annoyed you," I said, keeping my voice calm. His response? "I'll tell my father you refused a direct order." I met his gaze without flinching. "Go ahead." He stormed out. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought his father would knock some sense into him. But I'd underestimated how far entitlement would go. On the night of the annual spring gala, I was representing our international clients, the same division I'd built from scratch over 6 years. Everything felt perfect. The venue glittered. The investors were pleased. For a moment, I let myself believe hard work actually counted for something. And then, my phone buzzed. One text. From Richard Carter. "Claire, please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning." I felt my stomach twist. I barely slept that night. By 7:30 a.m., I was standing in front of Richard's desk. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Claire, I'm afraid I have to." But before he could finish, I leaned in. "Check your inbox first." His face went deathly pale. Because what he didn't know? I'd been documenting everything. Richard Carter stared at his screen like it was a live grenade. The color drained from his face. He clicked once, twice. Opened the folder I'd quietly sent him the night before. Inside were 43 forwarded emails. Every single one from Nathaniel. Some were laughable, some borderline illegal. There was Nathaniel ordering departments to falsify delivery reports, Nathaniel demanding the finance team adjust numbers to make his forecasts look good, Nathaniel emailing me directly with gems like, "Just do what I say or I'll make sure you're out." I stood silently, letting Richard take it all in. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "I had no idea." I folded my arms. "Didn't you?" He flinched, because the truth was, he had known, at least part of it. But turning a blind eye is easier when it's your golden boy acting out. Easier until the proof lands in your inbox. Richard buried his head in his hands. Claire, why didn't you come to me sooner? I kept my voice level. Because I thought this company believed in merit. And because I didn't want to be the reason your family imploded. He looked up, eyes sharp with something between guilt and fear. My board can never see this. I gave him a hard look. I'm not here to threaten you, Richard. I'm here because your son walked into my office yesterday morning and demanded I fire a team that just saved you $3.5 million. And when I refused, he promised to destroy my career. I paused, letting that sink in. I came here because I won't let a 19-year-old brat treat people like garbage while you look the other way. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the air conditioner. Then Richard whispered, "What do you want?" I smiled, just slightly. I want my career. I want the Johnson team protected. I want this nonsense to stop before it blows up in your face. And Nathaniel? That's your problem. I left Richard's office with my heart pounding. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about justice, about making sure hard work still mattered. But by Monday morning, I realized Nathaniel wasn't going to let it go. It started with whispers, emails I was suddenly left off, meetings rescheduled without me, budget approvals delayed, the subtle art of corporate sabotage. I caught Nathaniel smirking outside a strategy meeting I'd been excluded from. He actually winked at me. Here's the thing about entitled people like Nathaniel. They think power is a game they can rig. What they never realize is, sometimes the people they try to step on are the ones holding the foundation together. A week later, Richard called me back in. You're right, he said quietly. Nathaniel's out of control. I raised an eyebrow. Good. So you've spoken with him? Richard looked away. I tried. He won't listen. He told me if I don't get rid of you, he'll go to the board and cause trouble. I actually laughed. 19 years old and threatening board action? Impressive. Richard didn't laugh. Claire, I'm afraid I have to suspend you. Temporarily, just to calm him down. It's not personal. I stared at him, stone cold. It's never personal, is it? He winced. I'll make it right. I promise, but I already knew. He wasn't going to stand up to his son. He was going to sacrifice me, the person who built his international division, because it was easier. I nodded politely and walked out of his office with my head high. But I wasn't defeated, because Richard had no idea. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Walking out of Richard Carter's office that morning, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I'd learned long ago that in corporate life, loyalty often dissolves under pressure, especially when family's involved. But what Nathaniel and his father didn't realize was I wasn't standing alone. Because while they were busy plotting my exit, I'd been building something else entirely. 3 months before Nathaniel stormed into my office, I'd noticed things shifting. Clients were getting nervous. Senior managers were asking strange questions. And several high-level partnerships, ones I had personally negotiated, were suddenly being reassigned. It didn't take a genius to realize Nathaniel was positioning himself. He wanted to control the international division I'd built from scratch. And Richard was letting him. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting note, every client concern about Nathaniel's behavior. I had a clean, organized record of every reckless decision he made and every cover-up attempt Richard allowed. But I wasn't stupid enough to keep that information to myself. I reached out to 2 people I trusted more than anyone in the company. Marta Chen, our head of compliance, and David Alvarez, our senior legal counsel. Both of them had worked alongside me for years. Both of them had quietly expressed concerns about Nathaniel's behavior. Over coffee, off the record, I laid out everything I had. At first, Marta shook her head. Claire, this is a career-ending mess. David agreed. If the board sees this, I met their eyes. They need to see this. Not for me. For the company. There was a long pause. Then Marta leaned in. I'm with you. David nodded. Me too. That's when the real work began. We spent late nights cross-referencing contracts Nathaniel had meddled with. We tracked compliance violations that could have triggered investigations. David drafted confidential memos outlining potential breaches of fiduciary duty and who could be held responsible. Marta discovered that one of Nathaniel's special projects had nearly put us in violation of international trade laws. Had I not intervened quietly 2 months earlier, the fallout could have sunk the company. By the time Richard called me in to suspend me, I wasn't worried, because the board wasn't going to hear about Nathaniel's misconduct from me. They were going to hear it from their own compliance and legal departments. But that wasn't all. The final piece of the puzzle was our largest international client, Eastbridge Global Holdings. I'd built that relationship personally, and I knew for a fact they had serious concerns about Nathaniel after a disastrous meeting he'd led without me. So I reached out to Michelle Tan, their head of partnerships. We met for lunch. No pressure, no agenda. But when I casually asked about their plans for future contracts, Michelle gave me a knowing look. Claire, off the record? If you're gone, so are we. I blinked. Seriously? She nodded. We don't work with companies run by amateurs. That was all I needed. By the time my suspension hit the internal email list, 2 things happened simultaneously. Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board, and Eastbridge Global sent a formal letter of concern to Richard Carter, with a not-so-subtle warning about withdrawing future business if leadership changes weren't made. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. But honestly, I just felt ready. Because Nathaniel Carter had spent months thinking he could push me out with empty threats and childish tantrums. What he didn't understand was simple. You can't bully people who have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The official notice hit company-wide email at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Claire Patterson, administrative leave, pending internal review. No explanation, no details. Just a cold, sterile sentence announcing that I was, for all intents and purposes, out. But what Richard Carter didn't know, the review had already started, and it wasn't about me. At 10:05 a.m., Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board of directors. It wasn't dramatic. No accusations, no finger-pointing. Just cold, hard facts. Nathaniel Carter had attempted to manipulate financial data on multiple occasions. He had issued directives outside of his authority, risking contractual violations. He had interfered with compliance procedures, and Richard Carter, by omission or willful ignorance, had allowed it to continue. The report ended with a simple recommendation. We advise immediate review of leadership accountability and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. By 11:30 a.m., the boardroom was in lockdown. I wasn't there, of course, but Marta kept me updated via text. Richard looks like he's aged 10 years in an hour. Nathaniel tried to blame you, didn't go well. Board isn't buying it. They want answers. I read every message with a strange sense of calm. I hadn't leaked anything to the board myself. I hadn't gone public. I didn't have to. The truth had its own way of rising. Around 2 p.m., Richard called me. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again. By the 3rd call, I picked up. Claire, I think we need to talk. I let him sweat for a moment. About my suspension? He exhaled sharply. About everything. We met in his office late that afternoon. For once, Nathaniel wasn't hovering in the background. Richard looked hollow. The confident CEO mask was gone. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, he said quietly. I nodded. And? He hesitated. They've asked for Nathaniel's immediate resignation, and for me to step down temporarily pending review. I didn't flinch. Sounds appropriate. Richard gave me a bitter smile. You really did it. You destroyed him. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't destroy anyone. Nathaniel did that himself. I just refused to cover it up. For a moment, I thought he'd explode, but instead, he slumped forward. "You were the best we had," he whispered. "I should have backed you." I stayed silent, because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom I'd never been invited to before. 12 directors, cold eyes, serious faces. But when I sat down, something shifted. They didn't grill me. They didn't accuse. They asked for my perspective. And I gave it to them. Professionally, calmly, backed with facts. I told them about the deals I'd negotiated, the partnerships I'd protected, the risks I'd mitigated that Nathaniel's recklessness had created. I watched as heads nodded around the table. By the end of that meeting, the chairman leaned forward. "Claire, we'd like you to consider stepping into an interim leadership role for the international division while we restructure." I could hardly believe it. I wasn't just reinstated, I was promoted. But even as I shook hands and smiled politely, a part of me stayed guarded. Because promotions come and go. Titles shift. Power is temporary. But respect? That's earned. And it's the one thing Nathaniel Carter would never get back. 2 weeks after that board meeting, Nathaniel Carter was gone. No farewell email. No announcement. Just gone. I heard whispers he'd been shipped off to manage family investments overseas. In other words, they banished him quietly to avoid scandal. And Richard Carter? He stepped down voluntarily, citing personal reasons. The company's internal memo thanked him for his service and highlighted his commitment to future transition efforts. Corporate speak for, "We won't fire you publicly if you disappear quietly." On my first official day as interim director of international operations, I walked past Nathaniel's old corner office. Empty. Just a nameplate lying on the desk. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about protecting the people who'd been risking their careers under his chaotic shadow. I called my team together for a meeting. No fancy speeches, no victory laps. Just one simple promise. I don't care about titles or last names. I care about work, integrity, and respect. That's how we move forward. Together. And for the first time in weeks, I saw real relief on their faces. A month later, Eastbridge Global renewed their contract. Not because we begged them, but because Michelle Tan called me personally and said, "We want to work with leaders who know what they're doing. That's you." Other clients followed. Deals started closing again. Stability returned. The company didn't just recover, it started thriving. Then came the final twist. The board invited me for a private dinner. I wasn't sure what to expect. But sitting there, across from people who once viewed me as just another department head, I realized something had changed. They weren't looking at me as a placeholder anymore. They were looking at me as a leader. The chairman spoke first. "Claire, we'd like to offer you the permanent role of Vice President of International Operations, effective immediately." I paused, letting that sink in. "I have conditions," I said quietly. He smiled. "Let's hear them." And I laid them out. 0 tolerance for nepotism in leadership roles. Transparent accountability standards for all executives. Full authority to build and protect my team. My way. The chairman nodded after each one. "Agreed." I signed the contract a week later. Not for the title, not even for the raise, but because I wanted to make sure no one else would have to fight the same battles I did, just to be treated with basic dignity. And Nathaniel? The last I heard, he was working on some startup in Singapore, burning through his trust fund and trying to impress investors who saw right through him. Funny how that works. When you build your world on entitlement and fear, it collapses the moment someone refuses to play along. Looking back, I realized something. Nathaniel tried to destroy my career because I didn't follow his orders. Richard tried to sacrifice me to save himself. But neither of them understood the truth about power. Real power doesn't come from titles or threats. It comes from competence, character, and the people who trust you to lead them well. And that's something no spoiled heir and no cowardly CEO can ever fake. I was finishing a late client report when I heard the sharp sound of shoes clacking across the marble floor. Fast, loud, deliberate. The door to my office flew open. No knock, no greeting. Samantha. I looked up from my laptop. Standing in the doorway was Daniel Carter, the newly hired CEO. Slick suit, expensive watch, the kind of overconfident smile that usually comes right before bad news. We need a word, now. He tossed a folder onto my desk. It slid across the polished surface like a challenge. I stayed seated, my hands folded calmly in front of me. Of course, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. Daniel didn't sit. Instead, he leaned forward, both hands pressing down on my desk like he was staking a claim. We're restructuring leadership. Effective immediately. Your position has been terminated. I blinked once. I see. May I ask why? A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. You add absolutely nothing to this company. You're useless. This is a fast-moving business, Samantha. We need leaders, not administrators who cling to old titles and offer no vision. There it was. The kind of statement that hits harder because it's meant to. Dismissive, sharp, final. I could almost hear the imaginary audience gasping if this were a movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was real. And I had been waiting for this moment. I nodded slowly. Thank you for your clarity, I said, my voice neutral. Daniel narrowed his eyes, clearly caught off guard by my composure. He'd expected anger, protest, maybe even tears. HR will send your severance package. I'll need your badge and company phone by 5, he added, straightening his tie like a man sealing a victory. I extended my hand. All the best, Daniel. He stared for a heartbeat before shaking it. His grip was firm, firm enough to show dominance. He had no idea. As he walked out, head high, I remained seated, the faintest smile playing on my lips. Because what Daniel didn't know, what nobody in this building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks earlier, something had changed, and I'd been waiting for the right moment. I glanced at the photo on my desk. My grandfather standing in front of the company's original headquarters, arm around my father. The same company Daniel thought he could toss me out of like dead weight. I ran a finger along the edge of the frame. Wait until the time is right. My father's words echoed in my head. I stood up and began packing my things. I didn't take much. A mug my team gave me last Christmas, a few family photos, and a worn notebook filled with ideas Daniel would never see. Outside, the office buzzed with awkward curiosity. Some colleagues gave me pitying looks. Others avoided eye contact entirely. No one said a word, but I could see the questions in their eyes. What did she do wrong? Why would Daniel fire her? I walked past them all with a soft, polite smile. No fanfare, no theatrics. As I stepped into the bright afternoon sun, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. They thought they had ended my career. But what they had actually done was hand me the opening I'd been waiting for. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and sent a single text to my lawyer. It's time. Notify the board. The reply came seconds later. Understood. The special shareholders meeting will be scheduled within 5 business days. I turned and looked back at the glass-paneled building, its logo gleaming in the sun. Daniel thought this was over, but he had no idea. Because the next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as the majority shareholder. 5 days earlier, I sat across from Michael Grant, my family's longtime attorney, in his oak-paneled office. A room that smelled faintly of old leather, ink, and quiet power. The kind of office where deals were signed and futures were sealed. On the polished desk between us lay a thick envelope, sealed with a crimson wax stamp I recognized instantly. My father's. "Your father left very clear instructions," Michael said, his voice calm, almost ceremonial. "This envelope was not to be opened until your 32nd birthday." I glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. The long hand clicked softly into place. Noon. "It's time," Michael said with a faint smile. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, a letter written in my father's steady, unmistakable handwriting. "Samantha, if you're reading this, it means you've reached an age where you've proven yourself. Not to the world, but to yourself. I never doubted you would. By now, you've worked harder than most ever will. You've been overlooked, underestimated, and you've stayed true to who you are. I'm proud of you. This company was my life's work. And when I stepped down, I retained 90% of the shares, quietly, in a trust, waiting for you to be ready. Those shares are now yours, with full voting rights, effective immediately." I read the paragraph 3 times, feeling the words sink into me like slow falling snow. 90%. Not a symbolic amount. Not a token share to make me feel important. A controlling interest. My breath caught for a moment. Not out of greed or shock, but because I realized the weight of what this meant. I turned to Michael, holding up the trust documents. "Is this legitimate?" He nodded once. "Absolutely airtight. Your father structured everything to avoid public filings until you chose to act. No one knows, not even the board." I leaned back in my chair, the edges of reality sharpening around me. "Why didn't he tell me sooner?" I asked quietly. Michael smiled, something almost kind in his expression. "Because your father believed you needed to experience the company on your own terms. He wanted you to see who people really were, before you decided whether they deserved your leadership." That hit harder than I expected. For 10 years, I had worked in that company, climbing quietly, getting passed over for promotions I'd earned, watching new male executives, some barely competent, get handed opportunities I'd worked for. I thought patience and hard work would earn me respect. Turns out, I was wrong. What I needed wasn't time. It was leverage. And now, I had it. "I want to move carefully," I said, folding the papers neatly back into the envelope. "No public announcements yet." Michael nodded. "We'll prepare everything. When you're ready, the board can be notified within 2 business days." "Good," I said, standing. "Because I want them blindsided, especially Daniel." There was a flicker of surprise in Michael's eyes, but it vanished quickly. "You've got your father's instincts." I smiled. "I've got my own." As I walked out of the law office, the city seemed different. Sharper, more alive. The towering glass buildings that once felt imposing now seemed small. Because for the first time, I wasn't just another name on the payroll. I was the owner of 90% of the company Daniel thought he controlled. The board didn't know. Daniel didn't know. But they would. At the right moment. Back in the present, the afternoon Daniel fired me, I dropped off my badge and phone at HR with a calm thank you and a polite smile. I even shook hands with the receptionist on the way out. No one suspected a thing. Daniel's final words echoed in my mind as I walked through the lobby. "You're useless." It was almost funny, because the man who thought I was disposable had just fired his majority shareholder and walked himself straight into his own reckoning. And the best part? He'd invited it himself. By Monday morning, Daniel was already acting like a king. I'd heard from 3 former colleagues. 2 texted. 1 called. Daniel's parading around like he won some big power move. HR's been weirdly tight-lipped. "You okay?" "He's saying you couldn't handle pressure." I replied to none of them. Silence was part of the plan. I wanted Daniel confident. I wanted him convinced I'd disappeared quietly, that I'd accepted my fate without a fight. Let him bask in his false sense of control a little longer. because the higher he climbed, the harder he'd fall. That afternoon, I sat in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, the kind of place no one from the office ever visited. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, soft jazz playing in the background. Across from me sat Michael, his expression calm as ever. "Everything's ready," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "The shareholder meeting is scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. Formal notices went out this morning." I opened the folder. The papers inside were simple. Stark legal language, direct and precise. Notice of special shareholder meeting. Agenda item. Review and appointment of executive leadership. At the bottom, my signature. "This will hit them like a freight train," Michael said quietly. "They'll have 2 business days to realize the ground just shifted under them." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good." He leaned in slightly. "You're sure about this?" I met his gaze, steady. "They pulled the pin the moment they fired me. I'm just handing them the grenade." Michael gave a small nod of approval. "Your father would be proud." I wasn't doing this for pride. I was doing it because the company deserved better, because I deserved better, and because Daniel needed to learn what real leadership looked like. Tuesday morning, I met with Caroline Evans, trustee of the shares since my father's passing. Caroline had been with the company since its founding days, sharp, private, with a memory like steel. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "I've watched Daniel dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick," she said bluntly, sliding a thick file across her desk. "You don't owe him politeness." Inside the folder was everything I needed. Ownership certificates, voting records, performance reports under Daniel's leadership. And they were worse than I'd imagined. Employee satisfaction down 35%. Turnover rates spiking. Excessive spending on executive perks. Flat revenue growth in a booming market. Caroline's voice cut through my thoughts. "He's been hiding behind inflated projections. If this keeps up, he'll run the company into the ground within 2 years." I nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. "We'll let the numbers speak for themselves." She gave me a look. One part respect, one part challenge. "It's your company now. How you handle this sets the tone for everything that comes next." "I know," I said quietly, "and I won't waste the chance." As I left Caroline's office, I walked past the mural in the lobby, an oil painting of my father standing in front of the original headquarters. His hand rested on the shoulder of a small girl in a red dress. Me. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the painting. My father had believed in legacy, not as a monument to the past, but as a responsibility for the future. And even though he wasn't here, I could still feel his hand on my shoulder. By Wednesday morning, the whispers started. "Did you hear about the emergency shareholder meeting?" Daniel looks nervous. "Who called it?" The answer was coming, but not yet. I wanted Daniel walking into that boardroom thinking it was just another quarterly review, thinking he still had the room in the palm of his hand. Let him swagger. Let him smirk. Because when the truth hit, it would hit like a lightning bolt. And this time, I wouldn't be the one walking out. Thursday morning arrived sharp and cold, the kind of morning that felt like it belonged to someone else. I dressed with quiet precision. A tailored black suit. Clean lines. Simple jewelry. The kind of outfit you wear when you walk into a room not asking for power, but owning it. By 8:50 a.m., I was standing in front of the building I'd worked in for over a decade. The same building where I'd been dismissed like a replaceable cog in Daniel's machine. Only this time, I wasn't an employee. I was the majority shareholder. I walked through the lobby without a word. The receptionist froze as I passed. I caught the moment her eyes widened, the split second of recognition before she looked away, uncertain whether she should stop me. She didn't. Upstairs, behind the frosted glass of the boardroom, I could already hear voices. Daniel's among them. Confident. Commanding. I didn't break stride. Michael was waiting for me at the elevator, holding a slim leather folder. His face unreadable, but steady. "They're all inside," he said quietly. Daniel's already launched into his quarterly strategy speech. I gave a small nod. Not for long. Together, we walked to the boardroom door. I placed a hand on the handle, took a slow breath, and pushed it open. The room fell silent. 10 board members sat around the long oak table. Daniel stood at the far end, mid-sentence, a slide glowing on the screen behind him. When he saw me, his eyebrows shot up. "Samantha," he said, his voice sharp but still coated in smugness. "This meeting is for board members only. You're no longer—" I walked calmly to the head of the table, pulled out a chair, and set Michael's folder down. "Exactly," I said, my voice cool and clear, which is why I'm taking my seat. I sat down, at the head of the table. The shift in the room was instant. Board members exchanged glances. A few leaned forward. One of them, Mr. Callahan, a founding member, adjusted his glasses and glanced at the documents in front of me. Daniel blinked, trying to recalibrate. "Excuse me?" His voice lost a fraction of its edge. I opened the folder and laid out the ownership certificates and trust documents, sliding copies toward the board secretary. "I'm here," I said evenly, "as the majority shareholder of this company, holding 90% of shares, effective as of my 32nd birthday, in accordance with the trust left by my father." A long pause. Mr. Callahan picked up the document and read, his eyes narrowing as he skimmed. "Is this accurate?" he asked quietly. "It is," Michael confirmed, placing another copy in front of him. "The trust is fully executed. All filings have been submitted. Samantha Wren is, by every legal definition, the controlling owner of this company." Daniel let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "This is absurd. You expect us to believe—" "Believe it," I cut in. My voice steady, no louder than before. "Or read the documents yourself." For a heartbeat, Daniel just stared. Then his expression cracked. The disbelief flickered into something else. Fear. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "You fired me, Daniel. Called me useless. Told me I added nothing." I let the words sink in. "And you did it without knowing you were dismissing the person with the power to remove you. Permanently." A ripple of murmurs ran down the table. "I've called this special shareholder meeting," I continued, "to review the current executive leadership, effective immediately." Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "This is a coup," he hissed. "A personal vendetta." I shook my head once. "This is accountability." I slid a second folder across the table. The performance reports Caroline had compiled. Declining profits, rising turnover, excessive executive bonuses, misuse of company funds. I didn't have to explain it. The numbers spoke louder than I ever could. One board member flipped a page and let out a low whistle. Another whispered to the CFO, who immediately pulled out his phone, scrolling with a pale face. Daniel's face flushed. "You can't do this." "I already have," I said quietly. The board secretary looked at me, stunned. You don't need a second vote." "I hold 90%, I replied. "A majority by any standard." Mr. Callahan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands, effective immediately." Daniel slammed his palm on the table. "You'll regret this." I met his glare with calm certainty. "I don't think I will." Security didn't need to be called. Daniel walked out on his own, but as he did, I noticed something. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. By Monday morning, Daniel's nameplate had been removed from the CEO's office door. I didn't move in right away. I wasn't interested in playing the part of the conquering hero, or in decorating a bigger office to prove a point. I had something more important to do first: rebuild the company my father had started, the company Daniel had nearly destroyed. That same morning, I called an all-hands staff meeting in the main conference hall. a space I remembered mostly for Daniel's grandstanding speeches and empty promises. I walked in alone. No fanfare, no prepared speech. The room was packed, but the front rows remained empty, like no one wanted to seem too eager. Faces watched me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Some arms folded, some eyes narrowed, some heads tilted. They'd seen leaders come and go. They'd seen promises made and broken. They'd seen too much to trust easily. I took a deep breath and spoke the truth. Some of you know me, I began, my voice steady but real. Some of you have only heard the stories Daniel told. A few people exchanged glances. But let me start by saying this. I'm not here to take power. I'm here to restore trust. The room shifted. Slightly. Imperceptibly. But it shifted. For years, this company ran on your ideas, your late nights, your belief that what we were building mattered. I paused. And somewhere along the way, that got lost. A quiet silence settled over the room. I was fired last week, I said, a faint smile touching my lips. Told I wasn't the kind of leader this company needed. That I lacked vision, confidence, assertiveness. A few people chuckled nervously. I didn't fight back, not then, because I knew something Daniel didn't. I let the pause stretch, long enough for it to land. Leadership isn't about volume or vanity. It's about vision, about lifting the people who actually do the work, about respecting those who make this company what it is. I met eyes with familiar faces, engineers I'd collaborated with, assistants overlooked for years, team leads who'd held departments together without recognition. Starting today, everything changes. And it did. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something radical. I listened. I met with department heads, team leads, junior staff, interns, custodial workers. I asked what wasn't working, what they needed, who they thought deserved better. Then I acted. I promoted Mia, a customer service rep who'd quietly been running half her department while her boss took the credit, to head of client experience. I brought back Andre, a brilliant product manager who'd quit after being passed over 3 times for less qualified men. I overhauled HR from the ground up. Every complaint that had gathered dust in some forgotten folder. I read them, investigated them, acted on them. Several toxic mid-level managers were let go within the first week. And then I launched the People First Initiative, a program my father had once dreamed of but never lived to see. A program designed to reward collaboration, promote innovation, and recognize talent, regardless of job title or office politics. No more whisper networks, no more glass ceilings, no more favoritism disguised as leadership. Just good people, doing great work, and finally getting the credit they deserved. Late one evening, I walked the office halls alone. The atmosphere had changed. Laughter echoed from the break room again. Desks were decorated with plants, photos, little pieces of people's lives that had vanished under Daniel's regime. People stayed late, not out of fear, but because they wanted to. On a whiteboard near the engineering bullpen, someone had written in bold blue marker. She came back. 3 simple words, underlined twice. I stood there for a moment, reading it over and over. Not she took over, not she fired Daniel. She came back. And that meant everything. 1 month later, I finally moved into the CEO's office. I didn't change much. I kept the original walnut desk, the broad windows overlooking the city. But I did add one thing, a large framed photo on the far wall, my father and me on the company's opening day. Both of us smiling, both of us hopeful. I placed it behind my chair, not as a monument, but as a reminder. This wasn't just my company now. It was my responsibility. On the first board meeting after Daniel's departure, I stood at the head of the table. The board looked different now. Half the members were women. Several were under 40. People with fresh ideas, diverse perspectives, and a genuine desire to lead with integrity. Before we begin, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, I want to thank you. A few eyebrows lifted. for believing in change, for making hard decisions when the easy ones would have been safer, for helping rebuild a company that puts people before power. I paused, letting the moment settle. Someone once told me I lacked leadership. I smiled. But leadership isn't about titles. It's about vision, accountability, and the courage to do what's right. A soft ripple of applause followed. Not loud, but real. As I walked back to my office, I passed through every department, shaking hands, sharing smiles, listening. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about belonging. And finally, after all these years, we belonged.